All right, welcome to lesson number 2. This one, we are going to be building a spaceship interface. So all the stuff you'll find in the wiki, all the instructions, a code base for you to start off with. But let me show you what, we're going to be following these instructions from the Arduino book here. So this is everything we need. We need switches, we need LEDs, we need a 220 ohm resistor, we need a 10 kilo ohm resistor. First things first, let's talk about this. I won't say this every time we get into a project, but this is going to require you to pause and read a little bit. If you want to understand this, you're going to have to pause and read. Now, the book does a really great job of laying out exactly what's happening. It's not the easiest read, so let's be clear about that. But what they do really well is that it is beautifully done. It's clear, it's concise. And so what we're going to do is we are going to build a little control surface like you might find in a movie. Now, obviously, this is super simplified, but what we're going to do is we're going to use one of our inputs, and we're going to read it digitally. Now, when we talk about reading a digital input, let me just grab my marker here. When we talk about reading a digital input, anytime we talk about something digital, we're essentially talking about anything digital is either on or off. It's binary, 2. So it's either on or off, a 1 or, oh, you guys couldn't see that. It's either on or off, either a 1 or a 0. All right, that's a digital input. And so just like this, our digital inputs, as we read something, we can either read it as high voltage or low voltage. Okay, so it's reading that, and high is the same thing as saying, wait, there's something there. Low is the same thing as saying, oh, there's nothing there. And so we are going to use a little button and digitally read what's happening. So that's what the first part of this book is saying and explaining. So the next thing is it's time to build the circuit. So here's what we need. Here is our diagram. We also have a wiring diagram here just to help us sort of see it. And so what we're going to do, we're going to use this as my reference, and I'm going to set this up on my table here exactly like the picture shows. So here we go. I've got, let's pull this up here. There we go. I've got my Arduino, in this case the Elegoo. I've got my breadboard. And so what we're going to do is we're first going to take care of the power side of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a red jumper cable from our 5 volts into our positive side. So remember from the electricity unit that our positive, if we plug something in here, it runs down this whole strip. If we plug something into our ground, it's going to run, or the negative, it's going to run this whole strip here. So we're going to use black and red. I think it's a good habit to get into using black and red. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our little DuPont jumper cables. I'm going to go into the 5 volt here, just like that, and I'm going to jump that over here into my positive 5. There we go, so you guys can see the actual thing. And then I'm going to take my black ground cable. I'm going to come out of my ground pin, and I'm going to go into one of the negative terminals there. Now remember, it doesn't really matter which one we choose of these ones, because if I plug it into one, it's going to be good for all of these guys down this side. It won't be good for these guys, because remember, this gap in the middle separates the two sides. So the next thing I need in this thing here that I'm going to do is I'm going to get my LEDs. So I need 2 red LEDs and a green LED. So here are my 2 red LEDs. Here is my green LED. Now, if you look closely at the LED, let's just zoom in here. Let's see if we can see that. So when you look closely at the LED, you'll notice that one side is longer than the other. Okay? When we look at the diagram itself, we see the same thing. This bent side here of our LED is a little bit longer. So the bent one is our longer side. So we're going to keep the longer sides always to the top of our breadboard here. Not a hard, fast rule. One is the cathode, one is the anode. So we're going to keep the long ends up to the top here. So let's go back here. What I'm going to do, let's zoom in just a little bit tighter, is I'm going to start on row 10 here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the long end of my LED like this, and I'm going to push it down into the far side here. You can see that they put it on the diagram. They put it right up against the edge there. So I'm going to do the same. So there's one. I'm going to skip another 10. I'm going to go down to the 20 mark here. I'm going to put another red LED, taking care to put the long end at the top. And don't need to force it in. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my green. I'm going to go down to 30. I'm going to put it in there. So now I've got this red LED at 10 and 11, rows 10 and 11. This is at 20 and 21. This is at 30 and 31. All right, so we've got all of those wired in. Now, feel free to pause at any time. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a resistor. Now, the resistor goes to the short end of the LED and jumps over into, let's go look at the diagram here, short end of the LED and jumps over into the ground here. So here's my resistor. This is my 220 ohm resistor. Now, you'll notice that on our resistors, they're labeled. So for example, all of these guys here are 220 ohms. All right, that's exactly what we want. Now, we can also use the colors on the resistors. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. What I've done with these resistors is I've taken these resistors and I've gently bent them right at sort of just before the 2 points meet the resistor there in the middle. This is about the width that I need. We just want to be gentle bending them. We don't want them to break. Now you're going to break resistors, that's fine, but we want to get as close as we can. So again, I'm going to look at the wiring diagram. I'm going to notice that it comes to the bottom here. So on my first guy, I plugged it in at 10 and 11. So I'm going to come off of 11, row 11 here. So this guy right here. And I'm going to plug it from there into the ground. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ground here on 11. And let's just scoot it over a little bit. Something like that. Now I don't need to be in row 11 on my negative, on the power side of things. But I do want to keep it neat and tidy. So let's go ahead and let's take our resistors. Let's make sure I got the right resistors here. So I got one resistor that's different than the other. So I'm just going to look at those, make sure. That looks the same, that looks the same. I'm just going to take this guy out just to compare. All I'm doing is I'm just putting them together because I've got three 220 ohm and then I've got one that's 1 kilo ohm, so I just don't want to get those guys confused. So looking, this guy's my 1 kilo ohm. So I was just comparing the patterns on them. So let's go ahead and let's plug this in again. So 11 and 11, beautiful, something like that. Here, we'll zoom in a little tighter. There we go. This one, I'm going to go from the short end, so 21 to 21, something like that. And then we're going to do the same thing here for our last guy. Oh shoot, I grabbed the wrong one. There we go. This won't be as big of a problem for you guys because you'll have all the pieces together. And so you'll be pulling it off the little tape strand like that. And we'll do the same thing on the green. This is going to the bottom one, 31 into our negative on this side. There we go. So now we've got our resistors wired in. So we go back to our diagram. The next thing we got to do is we're going to take a signal cable. So I'm going to use orange in this case. They've got yellow on here. And we're going to go from pin 3 into the long end of the green LED. We're going to go from pin 4 into the long end of the red, pin 5 into the long end of the red. This is what's going to allow us to send signals. So I'm going to go on this guy. I'm going to count up 0, 1, 2, 3. So pin 3 here, plugged in there, and I'm just going to go anywhere. I'm just going to go right on the edge here into 30. So there's my first one, being gentle not to wreck that other guy. Then I'm going to go pin 4 into 20. And finally, I'm going to go pin 5 into pin 10 or into row 10. Just like that. And now those LEDs are all wired up. So you can actually see It looks pretty close when you compare the two. I chose to spread out my LEDs just a little bit more. So let's zoom out just a touch there. So there we go. So now I'm wired in. So now the next step here is we've got to wire up our little button. Now our button is what is going to be our input. This is going to tell it to do something. So we've got our little button here. Here's our little button. The button, when we look at it, when we look at the diagram here, these ends come off the side here. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look closely at this button here. Let's go tight on here and let's zoom in as tight as I can get it. Here's our little button here. You'll notice that there are the connectors that come off the side, so that's exactly how we're going to do it. We're going to come down here just a little bit. I'm going to come down to 40, and really all we need is we just need the one side connected there. So I'm going to just spread this out here like that, and I might have to just bend this very gently so that it'll fit in. So there we go. So what I've got is I've got this button splitting the gap between the two. Now nothing's going to go on this side. The button still connects these two sides here. So between 40 and 42 here. So those are going to be my two sides there. So now when we go back and look at the diagram, what we're going to do is we're going to take our power, which is red. So I'm going to take another little red jumper cable, and I'm going to connect it to the top end of this guy here. So they're at 22. I'm going to go to 42 or to 40. So we're going to go from here. So from red, oops, to 40. If it's not going in right, chances are you're just got to readjust. And then what we've got is we've got our 10 kilo ohm resistor. We've got our 10 kilo ohm resistor, so that's these guys right here. You can see 10 kilo ohms, so I've grabbed one of those guys off of there. And it's going to go from, let's look at our diagram, from our ground here, and it's going to go into the bottom part here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go from ground into 40, what is that, 42? There we go, just like that. And then the final piece that we need off our diagram here is we need to connect from pin 2, that's going to be our input pin, and it's going to detect the voltage at our switch here. So power is going to come through and around like this, and this button is going to tell it whether it's high or low, or on or off. And so what we're going to do is we're going to connect from pin 2 here on our Arduino, and we're going to connect it in to the same spot here on the button. So that would be in row 42. So just like that, our guy is wired up. So that took us about 12 minutes to get that guy wired up, give or take a little bit of time. So I'm just going to make sure that's all sitting relatively nice. And now it's time, I'm just going to slide it off to the side, and now it's time to get coding. So I'm going to bring my computer back over, just like this. And let's start taking a look at the process of coding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my project over to the side. I've already got a blank sketch open. Now, just a side note, if you don't see the little line numbers here on the side, go into Arduino, Preferences, and you can check this, tick this little box, Display Line Numbers. So that'll allow us to see what line everything is on and sort of keep up to date. So in the instructions, it says you can attach a little cardboard thing just to make it kind of look pretty. We're not going to do that. We're not going to worry about that right now. But this information here that we see from our Arduino instructions sort of give the foundation of everything that we're going to be doing down the road. And so it's worth taking a little bit of time to read, especially early on. So every Arduino program has two main functions. Okay. Now, a function is part of the program that runs a specific command. And so we have what we call a setup function and a loop function. And we need to have these things in both of them. We need to tell Arduino what these functions will do, what the setup and the loop will do. And so we're going to set up that first. We also have what we call variables. And so we are going to name our variable, and we're going to call this one switch state. Now, a variable, like in math, is something that can change. All right. So when we say what is x? Well, it's because x can change. It just represents a value. So we don't call it x because it doesn't tell us much about what it does. So we're going to call it switch state because that's going to tell us what the state of our switch is. And so we're going to get coding, and we're going to call this, and we're going to get this set up. So we're going to put in a variable, and we're going to call this variable, it's going to be an integer. It's going to hold a whole number. And then essentially what we're going to do is we're going to build our setup and our loop function. So let's get into it. So this instructions kind of walk you step by step. So I'm going to go relatively quickly. I'm going to type it all out. I'm not going to copy and paste it. This is a good thing because you'll see in a second I'm going to make mistakes, and we're going to fix them at the end. So let's get started. So in line 1 here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build my setup. Now if I were to start from scratch here, let's not save, let's go a new one here. You'll notice that that's already set it up here. So you can do that or you can't do that. I'm going to start completely fresh. And I'm going to start off by typing void setup. I'm going to put 2 parentheses, open and closed, and then I'm going to put a curly parentheses. So on your keyboard, let's see here if I can show you on my keyboard. On your keyboard, for me on my Mac right now, oops, not that one, this one. My little curly bracket is this guy right here. And what you'll notice is that when I type that curly bracket, it automatically puts in the other bracket. Let me go back and let's redo that here. So I'm going to go back here. So when I type in a little curly bracket and hit enter, it's automatically going to close that curly bracket. So these are kind of like the start and the end of this section of code. Everything inside the curly bracket has to do with our setup command. All right, now I'm just going to get ready here, and I'm going to go put a space in here, and I'm going to create my loop command. So this is what it's going to do over and over, 2 parentheses, close, boom. There, we're ready to go. So what I'm going to do is the first thing we have to do is we have to name our variable. So that's our first thing first, and it suggests putting it on line 1. So I'm going to put it on line 1 here. I'm going to type int. I'm going to type switch state. And I'm going to say that is equal to 0. Now, what's really important here, guys, is capitals are important. So if you see a capital here on state, you have to put a capital here because, as you'll see in just a second, switch, if you get the capital wrong, it means something completely different. So now we can move down to the next part, and it has that little note here on the side. Pay attention to the case sensitivity. So pin mode with the capital M is the name of a command. But if you type in pin mode with a lowercase m, it's going to produce an error. So we're now in our void setup thing, and I'm going to get these pins set up. So what I'm doing here when I type in pin mode, you'll notice that it turns orange, is I'm going to say pin 3 is going to be an output, and I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of it. Now what that's saying is that on my Arduino, let's just go over here to my little simulator here so I can just show you quickly. What that's saying is that pin 3 here, let's see, can we scoot over here? Pin 3 right here, that's going to be treated as an output. All right, so we're setting up what each one of our pins is going to do. So I'll go back here. I can put a new line in here. Again, I'm going to do a pin mode. I'm going to say pin 4 is also going to be an output. Put a semicolon at the end. You'll notice at the end here, I'll show you in just a second what happens when I don't put a semicolon. I'm going to put pin mode. Pin 5 is also going to be an output. Let's not put a semicolon after that. And then we'll do pin mode. We'll do pin 2 because that's where we connected the switch. That is going to be our input. All right, I'll put a semicolon after that one. Now notice my brackets automatically closed here, and so now I'm ready for sort of that next step. So now we can go down into our loop section. Now our loop section is, once the setup is done, it's going to keep running everything that's inside our loop section. So what we're going to do here is we're going to type in switch state. So that's our variable that we set up at the top here. So our switch state, and we're going to say that that is going to be equal to, and we're going to add a command here. We're going to call this digital read. Now, digital read. If it doesn't go orange, you know you've made a typo somewhere. And we're going to set that to pin 2. So what that's saying here is that it's going to digitally read pin 2. That means that it's going to be either on or off, open or closed, high or low. So it's going to read pin 2 because pin 2, if we look at our wiring diagram again here, pin 2 is where we've connected our switch. All right, so it's going to be watching that switch, and if it detects voltage, it's going to say that it's closed, and it's going to say that it's high, that there's voltage passing, and if there's no voltage there, it's going to say that it's low. Now, what's nice about a code like this is if we type 2 slashes, we can enter a comment. So is a comment. Now, a comment does not make its way into the code, so we can remind ourselves or remind others what exactly we're doing on there. So there's a comment. We've got more information here. So this is telling us what's happening. So if there's voltage, it's going to get a high value or 1. And if there's no voltage, it'll get a low value or 0. Now, we need to give some kind of conditional statement. So this is the word if. So we're going to write an if statement that compares two things, and if it's true. So when comparing two things in programming, we use two equal signs. If you use one, you're saying this is what it is versus we're asking it to compare. So let's go down here and let's code this part here. So starting on line 11 here, I'm going to get rid of this comment here for a second. And what we're going to do is we're going to type the word if. Okay, and we're going to say if the switch state, this is our variable, we're going to type two equal signs, and it's equal to low. We'll close off that bracket and we'll put a little curly Q bracket. What that's saying is that if it comes back and it says that the switch state is low, then it's going to do whatever is inside those brackets. So let's just put a note for ourselves. So switch state is low, meaning that the button is not pressed. So let's figure out what it's going to do. So we're going to start by doing this. We're going to write our pins on and off, high and low essentially. So we're going to do a digital write. So when we digitally write something, that means it's either on or off. So we're going to write pin 3, so that's our green pin, to high. Okay? And I'm going to put a semicolon at the end there. And I'm going to say green LED, just to remind myself that pin 3 is the green LED. So the green LED will be on. And I want both my red LEDs to be off. So I'll do digital write pin 4. That's one of my red LEDs. That's my second red LED. I'm going to set that to low. And I'm going to say, just remind myself, that is the red LED. And then digital write pin 5. We're going to set that also to low, so that one will be off. That is my other red LED. So notice those two slashes mean that's not part of the code. I'm just including that in my, so I can tell myself after. And then I'll close off my curly Q bracket. Now, if the switch state is low, that's one possibility. The other possibility is that it's high, the button is pressed. Now, we don't have to write that if it's high, we can just say else, meaning if it's anything else, and we don't have to put any condition in there, we can just put a curly Q bracket and call it done. So else, and what that else means is that if the button is pressed, so if that button is pressed, what I want to do is I want my red LEDs to flash on and off. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a digital write. So we're sending an output, digital write to pin 3. I'm going to turn pin 3 off. So I'm going to say that's low. Then I'm going to do a digital write. Pay careful attention to your capitals there. I'm going to write digital write. I'm going to write pin 4. I'm going to keep that one off too. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my third red LED. So I'm going to go digital write pin 5, and I'm going to write that one as high. Now, this is cool, but it's not the only thing I want to do. What I want to do is I want to wait a short amount of time, and then I want to flip the two red LEDs. So I'm going to write delay. Now, a delay means that it's going to stop doing everything else. So I'm going to put a delay in there of 250 milliseconds. And that there is wait for a quarter second. So 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second, so 250 is a quarter of a second. So that's going to wait for a quarter second. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I'll write this as swap the two red LEDs. I just put a little note in for myself there. So I'm going to go digital right. Now I don't need to write pin 3 because it's already set as low. So it's already going to be off. So I only need to write pins 4 and 5. So pin 4 was low before, so I'm going to make it high. And then I'm going to do the same thing, digital right, pin 5, and I'm going to turn that low. And then what I want to do is I want to delay for another 1/4 second. So it's going to pause for another 1/4 second, and then it'll keep looping that as long as the button is pressed. So a little note for myself, wait for a 1/4 second. Now this bracket here you can see closes off my else statement. You can see it highlights this. So this guy closes this off, this curly bracket. This guy here sends us all the way back up to the loop. So constantly it's going to be checking, is it the button pressed? If the button's not pressed, it's going to keep that green LED on. As soon as the button gets pressed and it keeps checking that, then it's going to send it back and it's going to alternate flashing those red LEDs. So now let's try this. I'm going to scoop this guy over to the side here. I'm going to bring in my contraption back into the middle here. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in my USB cable. That's what's going to give me power for this guy. And you'll notice nothing's happened yet because I haven't sent the code just yet. In fact, my blink code is still running from the last one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and on my Arduino software here, I'm going to click upload. Now it's going to ask me, what do you want to save this as? We're going to keep the same naming conventions. We're going to call this project 02. Now we don't want any spaces in here, so we can use underscores, we can use hyphens. So I'm going to call this project 02, and I'm going to call this, what was this guy called? This was called Spaceship. Spaceship interface. I'm not going to put any spaces in there, otherwise it'll fix it for you, which is fine. Spaceship interface, and then I'm going to put my last name in there, just so when you send me the code, I know exactly whose I'm looking at. I'm going to click save. Now it's going to start compiling my sketch. I'm going to make this, oops, I'm going to make that big here. Now you'll notice here that I got an error message at the bottom. So I'm going to wing this up here. Now 2 really cool things happen here. The first things first is it's going to tell me exactly what's expected. So the first thing here is that it shows me this red line here. So this red line is where the first thing says. And it says it expected a comma or a semicolon before void. So I'm going to come up here and go, oh, look at that. At the end of this guy here, I did not put a comma or a semicolon. I can go back and I can check my code here. So let's just go down. We're going to check our code. And when we compare, and you'll notice, sure enough, at the very end of this guy was supposed to be a semicolon. So I went ahead and added that in there. So now I can go ahead and try it again. But you'll notice I can also go down the list and figure out what's wrong here. So now the second one says, before line 6. So before line 6, it expected a semicolon before that. So, oh, sure enough, there it is. I missed it there. So I'm going to drop in my semicolon there. And then the other thing here, it says, if switch state is equal to low, so that's this guy here, it expected a semicolon before there. So oh, there's another mistake there. Told you I was going to make a few. And then before else, it says else. Let's actually just send it here and just make sure I got those. Oh, looks like we got it. So it says done uploading. So let's take a look at my guy here. So you'll notice with the button not pressed, I've got a green LED lit up. So now what should happen is that when I press the button, I should see my 2 lights flash. And then when I release it, I should go back to my off state. So with the green light. So press, those buttons flash, I release, it puts it on. So this is it running exactly the way I wanted to. So follow my instructions for how I asked you to submit your project at the end of it. I suspect I'll be asking you to submit your code. I suspect I'll be asking you to submit a brief video just showing me that you got it working. And then you can move on to the next project. Hopefully that made sense. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. This kind of stuff, I love this kind of stuff. This is fun. So enjoy and holler at me if you need help troubleshooting.